This is Back Roads of Illinois server to farmers and ranchers in central Illinois and the Midwest. Today is edition of Back Roads of Illinois. We are bringing you lasted for farming sources and information sponsored by AgriGold. We're glad you're here on a Monday afternoon. The farmers is aged out and about declining for every year without having steady income and the commodities markets, especially in uncertainty with American ag products in the grains market. We're here to discuss this topic with Chad Hart from Iowa State University Extension. I'm having a conversation about precision planting with Jason Webster in Pontiac, Illinois, out of Bloomington. This is Back Roads of Illinois server to farmers and ranchers in central Illinois and the Midwest. This is your commodities markets update for this afternoon, sponsored by Kyle Bumstead from Allendale Incorporated. July corn is down at 4.36 quarter. September corn is down at 3 to 5 cents at 4.25. July beans are down at 10.55 at half. August beans are down at 10.45 half. KC May wheat was down for today. July KC wheat is down at 5.47. August KC wheat is down at 5.57. Chicago wheat is down at 5.25. Chicago wheat is down at 5.55. June cattle is up at 222.16. August cattle is 219,425. July feeder cattle is up at 310.08. September feeder is up 310.09. June hogs is down at 107.06. August hogs is up at 102.75. This has been your commodities markets for this afternoon. The farmers is aged out and about declining for every year without having steady income and the commodities markets, especially in uncertainty with American ag products in the grains markets. We're here to discuss this topic with Chad Hart from Iowa State University Extension. Chad, how are you and Ames?
I'm doing well, Caesar. I hope you can say the same.
I'm good. Okay, Chad. An average farmer is in his 58 and 60s. Why are the families that they don't take it over with the liability of the operation?
Well, I think you're seeing a couple of things happening here. One, yes, that average age of farmer, they are getting older. Part of that is because of the technology we have within agriculture today, making it where, if you will, more seasoned farmers can continue to farmer deeper into their lives and their careers. But yeah, we're also seeing a challenge in bringing those young and beginning farmers back on the farm again as we look there. And so that's leading to an increasing age there. And I think, you bring up the question of, okay, why aren't people taking over? I think the challenge is taking over, as you mentioned, the liability here. To get started, especially in row crop farming these days, does take a tremendous amount of capital. And that is hard for young farmers to gather early in their career. And so you tend to see this, let's call it slower transition these days as opposed to generations past in order to get that next generation up and going on the farm.
How about the estate planning on the farm, Chad?
Well, that's a big concern, I would say, for a lot of us as we stare at agriculture. But I often like to point out that this is not necessarily a new concern. I know when I first got into my role here at Iowa State, I was digging through some of the historical documents that were left in my office suite, and I stumbled upon some of the writings of Bill Murray. Now, Bill Murray is a well-known figure here in Iowa. He was a economics professor. He ran for governor twice back in the 1930s and 40s,
Mm,
and he's also the gentleman who founded Living History Farms. But I stumbled upon one of his first papers, and it was talking about the farm
mm,
succession
mm.
problem that they were staring at back in the 1940s. So here we are 80 years later, worried about the same issue, seeing the same sorts of trends, but knowing now we've been through 80 years of this and we've always found a way to transition that farmland to the next generation. It's becoming harder to do because farms are larger, they're much more
Uh,
capitalized, and you have fewer folks participating in farming than we had back then.
uh, uh,
Of course, not actor in Ghostbusters.
uh,
Nope, not the actor in
uh,
Ghostbusters. So Bill Murray is a
uh,
whole separate ball game out of Chicago. But yeah, here we got a Bill Murray or William Murray as he's professionally known.
uh, uh, uh.
I talked with a friend about the declining for farmland and family farm in Illinois. What makes the farmer sells for their lands?
Well, that's the deal. If you have a farmer actively selling land, that is usually a incredibly hard sign. That indicates definitely financial stress on the farms to the point where they're not paying the bills. Again, that liability just became too much. But when we look at farm sale data, for the most part, we don't necessarily see active farmers oftentimes selling that land. Traditionally, when you're thinking about agricultural land changing hands, it typically happens once the farmer's either retired or they have passed on. And so, as your earlier question led to, that farm succession is often the time when we will see the land change hands. It is especially the case when you think about, a fairly large farm that maybe has two, three, or four heirs on it, and maybe one of those heirs wants to farm, but then they've got to try to buy out the other two or three heirs to keep the family farm together. And that's a tremendous amount of financing that's needed all at once in order to pull that off. And usually that's when we see at least part of the farm being sold off. So it is a challenge as we look right now. And I think it's one that I know each state has their own approach to trying to work around that problem. We have beginning farmer grant and loan programs. We set up things like I know here in Iowa, we do tax credits to incentivize retired farmers to rent to beginning farmers to get them started in the industry. But it is definitely a challenge across agriculture.
What is the typical of the farmland value after the sell chat?
Well, if you think about that farmland value that we're seeing right now, it is still at a very strong level across the nation. Um, what we've had, especially here in the 2020s, has been a fairly strong land market. I know here in Iowa, our average land values now are somewhere near $12,000 an acre, where some of our premium farmland can bring $10,000 more than that. So we've seen these incredibly strong values being bid in there. And, the people that, for the most part, are buying that land are existing farmers that, we're seeing that agricultural land remain in farms, working with other existing farmers, even if it did have to change farm hands as we look out there.
300 for every day for the feeder cattle. Do you have any concerns about these prices overheating?
I do worry about not necessarily overheating, but the idea is that we know within the cattle market there's going to come a day sometime fairly soon where this industry does start to rebuild. And so we start to see those heifers being retained in the herds instead of going into the feedlots and keeping the, feeder cattle supplies strong. And what that's going to mean is initially retaining those heifers is going to spike that feeder cattle price up. But once we know that those heifers are being retained and the calves start to come our way, we know that's going to put a lot of downward pressure on feeder cattle prices. And so I'm remembering back and looking back to what we experienced the last time we saw the major shift in our cattle cycle, which was 2014. And what you had back then was this spike up the record high feeder cattle prices, followed by a very swift drop once we recognized that the cycle was sort of over. We were back to rebuilding again, and that released, if you will, a lot of that pricing pressure and drove those prices back down again. So we'll likely see the same thing as we're moving forward here. The question is, when do we see that turnaround and how quickly might we see these prices cool off? I think as I'm looking forward in 2025, I don't necessarily see prices falling off that dramatically this year, but I am worried about 2026.
What happened with the expansion, Chad?
We're still waiting for the expansion. I think there's a few reasons why we haven't seen it yet. Some of them physical, some of them financial. I think when you're looking at the physical side, the problems we still have with drought, especially in the southern plains, has limited their capability of starting that cattle expansion. But I think there's also the reason of if you think about the beef market itself has remained fairly strong and resilient despite these higher prices. So consumer demand for beef remains very robust. And that's helping hold those beef prices up and still make it more attractive to send these heifers into the feedlot right now, even though, yeah, cow-calf operations are seeing a lot of profitability as well. But eventually, that balance between sending that heifer to the feedlot versus sending her back to the pasture, I think that's going to tilt back towards the pasture. And that's when the expansion starts. And a little bit after that is when cattle prices will back off because of increasing supplies.
What is your final thoughts with crop insurance through the Farm Bill?
Well, I think as we're looking at the debate about the Farm Bill and getting something through Congress, uh, it looks fairly challenging to get a standalone Farm Bill. So I think what we're going to see again is like we've seen over the past couple of years, that we'll likely see some sort of extension of the current farm bill through some sort of continuing resolution as we look out there with greater debate on what a true standalone farm bill might look like next year. But when you think about crop insurance within the farm bill, the crop insurance program itself does not rely upon the passage of a farm bill. Crop insurance was passed under its own act of Congress. But what the farm bill does do is it does make changes to the premium subsidies we might see for our crop insurance policies out there. So we could see some tinkering there. Um, but like I say, given what we're seeing right now out of Congress and the way things seem to be moving, a lot of this through continuing resolutions, that tends to maintain the status quo when it comes to what we see with our crop insurance program.
Thanks, Chad.
My pleasure.
This is Chad Hart from Iowa State University Extension on to I'm having a conversation about precision planting with Jason Webster in Pontiac, Illinois, out of Bloomington. Jason, how are you? And
I'm doing,
welcome to the show.
thanks. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Jason, could we talk about your experience with precision planting with our audience on the company?
Yeah, I've been with the company almost 9 years now, and I was attracted to this company because it just tries to help farmers. What we do is we're a group of farmers, we're a group of researchers, we're a group of scientists who want to challenge the status quo, is what we say. We want to challenge the ways we've been taught how to do farming in the past, and we want to find new ways to be better. And how do we be better? Well, it's one of two ways. We either increase yield or we increase efficiency. And that's what we're here to do. We take all the things that we were taught for the past decades and we compare it to something else and just trying to be better. So it's all about measuring. The only way you know where you're at on the totem pole is if you can measure. And so once you know that, then you know how much improvement you need to make. And that's what our company's all about.
How is the effectiveness of your products for the farmers?
Well, that's a great question. We evaluate things here on a net return basis. So we do harvest the crop, we'll take it to yield, but we've got to look at net return. And so when we
Right.
rank all of our treatments at the end of the year, it's always by dollars per acre. And I was given a data slide from the University of Illinois this winter that said over the last 24 years, the average farmer in central Illinois with a rotated corn and soybean rotation on cash rent acres, the average net return was about $45 an acre. And that tells me where we've been, what farmers are in it for on average. Obviously, some years are higher than that, some years are lower, but we've got to do better with the input costs that we have, with the land costs that we have. We got to farm smarter. And we're finding things on this farm in our analysis where we can increase net return by not only $100 an acre, but sometimes even up close to 300. So we're trying to find those things that are going to make us more money, make us more efficient, and that's what's going to keep the farmers sustainable for the next generation.
Great to hear that. Yes, because the grains markets are currently lower.
Yeah, and we talk about things that we can't control in farming, and grain prices are one of them. Unfortunately, I wish I could increase the price of grain, but I can't. And so we have to focus on things here that say, okay, when corn prices are down, we need more bushels per acre to sell, even if it's a low price. But I've got to look at the cost analysis. I've got to know my break even. I have to keep my costs as low as possible without sacrificing production. And that's what we're trying to look at here, even though we may have some lower prices.
Sure. To see the dust storm from last couple weeks ago.
Yeah, yeah, the dust storm was incredible. We were out planting, and all of a sudden we saw that dust coming in, and it was a very eerie feeling. I don't know that I've really seen anything like that to that extent. Um, I guess in my 30 some years of farming. It is interesting. A lot of folks are talking about tillage and how farmers are doing way too much tillage, stirring the soil up, and that was the reason for the dust storm. We advocate a lot of different tillage programs on this farm, from no-till to vertical till to strip till to conventional till, and saving soil is definitely something that we firmly believe in. We don't want the soil transferring from one farm to the next. And so it's just, I think we were caught in a situation right after planting time. Planting time, we're going to be stirring a little bit of soil. And so it was just one of them things about timing, and it was very interesting to see. But I know there's a lot of blame being put on farmers as a result of it. But I do think that there's a lot of farmers that take great pride in soil health and soil quality, and we don't want dust blowing. We really don't. So it's not something that we're trying to do by all means.
I was in Pontiac from the dust storm.
Yeah, in Pontiac, the dust storm came through. We were planting, and it was almost like we had to turn the lights on on the tractor when the dust came through. It was just that dark, eerie feeling, and we needed to move fields across the road, and we waited. We didn't want to be on the roads and wanting to have farm equipment on the roads with traffic. So it was an interesting day, that's for sure.
It looks like a monster from the movie.
Yeah, it did. It did look like a monster coming through. It was very strange. It would have been nice to have a little bit of rain with it to kind of settle all that dust, But when that thing came rolling in with those heavy winds we had, and I guess that's another thing. It just seems like every day the wind's got to be blowing about 30, 40 mile an hour. I think somebody had told me that April was the windiest on record. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it sure felt like it. It sure seemed like it every day was windy, and it sure was a real challenge to get spraying done, things like that, and just during planting time, it just wore the heck out of you fighting that wind all day long.
What is your final thoughts on the growing season in 2025?
Well, my final thought would be we got to finish this thing, and I know for a lot of folks that just finished up planting, that's probably a hard word to comprehend, but it's all about side dressing, at least for us. We believe in continuing to feed the crop. We don't feed it just one time. It's just like us as human beings. We need to eat multiple times during the day to keep us being productive. We feel that same way with our crop out here. So we don't want this crop to have a bad day. We can make sure we can, monitor for nitrogen efficiency out in the field. Some of the folks have had some heavy rains. Maybe we need to be looking at nitrogen losses, things like that. But we've got tons of technology and equipment. We can come in and we can make additional applications if we need to. But it all comes down to scouting. In my opinion, scouting's the number one problem we have in the ag industry because nobody wants to do it. Most farmers are going to scout 55 mile an hour from the cab of their pickup truck with the air conditioner on, the radio on, and life is good. But we've got to know what's going on in the field so we can measure, as we talked about before, and then we can make good, sound decisions. But it all comes down to scouting, those measurements in the field to know what we're dealing with. So don't give up on this crop. Be out there, and this crop is talking to us. We got to be smart enough to listen.
Thanks, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We've had a great conversation with Jason Webster from Precision Planting One Back Roads of Illinois. Thanks to Chad Hart from Iowa State University Extension and Jason Webster from Precision Planting in Pontiac Farm. This has been Back Roads of Illinois. I am